Pleased by that. Welcome to Off the Post. I'm Russ Cohen. We've got Anthony Vigioni. And how are you?
Completely unfazed on this Sunday morning, Russ. How are you?
Yeah, me too. Me too. And then Michael Jello, Mr. Positivity. How are you?
I'm in a constant state of phasement. Good morning.
Phasement's not a word, but okay.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is?
I invented it. Thank you.
You invented it. All right.
There we go.
Thank you. So let's start off with the weirdness of this Eastern Conference, the last wild card race.
Mm-hmm.
It's odd. All right, a perfect example is I will start off by saying I watched a fair amount of the Rangers Canucks because I wanted to see the Sam Rosen ceremony, and Sam was a nice guy. He helped me twice for two of my Ranger books, gave me unlimited time with him and amazing quotes, and so I have nothing but great admiration for him. But and he did it once in Philly, and before the game, he took an hour with me. I went early. That's what he would do. It didn't matter if it lengthened his day or whatever. But so that was nice to see. But the game was the oddest game you will ever see in your life because I think the Rangers ended up with 12 shots on goal and had 5 goals.
Yeah.
I mean, and Kevin Lankinen, look, I am not a Lankinen fan, and that was probably the worst game of his career, so I'm not going to flag him for that.
Yeah, anybody who's got a 64% save percentage, it's not going to be one for to keep in the file.
This game it was lost for a while from the Rangers.
Anton Forsberg was saying, "Hold my beer."
No, it was basically the Anton Forsberg Award, basically.
That is the Anton Forsberg Award. We should make that. I would actually think about making that. But this game, it's bad if you're rooting for the Canucks to make the playoffs. And honestly, it's bad if you're rooting for the Rangers to make the playoffs because they just lucked out in this one. They got some offense late off of some bad goaltending. And look, I could see Quinn Hughes was burning, man. He was trying to win that game by himself after a while because it was just shot, goal, shot, goal, shot, goal on both sides. But Shesterkin, weathered the storm at the end, and that's what he does. But the Rangers don't have a winning formula here. It's just I don't know if they're going to make it.
It's pure chaos, and I don't know what it is right now. I just have this in the back of my head that the Rangers are going to backdoor entry into the playoffs, and everything's going to click for some reason. They're going to have. I'm telling you, there's something about this Rangers team that's it's going to be like a 2010 Flyers run. I've just had this weird feeling about it.
I can't see it.
I know. Russ is the doubting Thomas. I said the same thing when I was talking to him yesterday. I said, "You watch. They're going to sneak into the bottom wild card in the East. They're going to play Washington, who they schooled in the playoffs last year. Shesterkin is going to do his best, Terry Sawchuk or Vladislav Tretiak imitation, and they're going to win in 6 or 7 games. And everyone's going to say, well, where was this all year? Well, it's chaos there. That's what
it is, and that's the thing when you're dealing with
allow that. That's the problem.
Well, I'll tell you this.
There's no Chris Pronger on this defense.
No, but watching this Rangers team this week when they played Toronto on Thursday, I was stunned by how just incompetent defensively is a team.
Yeah.
Incompetent and lazy. When they have Carson Soucy playing on the top pair with Adam Fox, I'm like, Jesus Christ.
You're grasping. You're basically grasping for answers, to try to figure maybe this will work, or maybe it's just like the dartboard lineup, basically.
Maybe Carson Soucy will roll it back 5 years when he could skate better. It's just the guys aren't there. The horses. They have offensive players, obviously, but on defense they don't have enough. And Shesterkin can't stop everything. They get so many point blank shots teams against the Rangers that it's crazy. But so you have that. The Canadians, that game was interesting. I wake up and I see that Jim Beringer had posted a quote that I said about Mackenzie Blackwood, that he needed a team that could score a lot because he will have these games where he will give up a lot of goals. And with the Devils, they couldn't afford that because the Devils never can score enough goals, right? But the Avalanche can. And they ended up beating the Canadians in the shootout, but they were up 4-1 and they lost the lead.
Yeah. You're going to have those kind of games, though.
Yeah, this is another game where that's the only hesitation I have with the Avalanche is their goaltending is better than Georgiev, but in a big, tight game, I don't know. I don't know if I still trust Blackwood.
It's creating a better you don't develop your own guy, basically, they're trying to figure things out with regards to knowing that, hey, at least we know this guy is better than the guy we dealt. So therefore, their idea here for Colorado is if you get just good enough goaltending, and we've seen this happen with a team like Vegas with Adin Hill and other teams as well who have made deep playoff runs, that if you get that, as John Tortorella says, that one extra stop, and doesn't give up that one critical goal, that the rest of it will fall. A lot of the rest of it in front of them will fall into place, and that's what the Avs basically are doing here with Blackwood. And listen, they're committed to him now. This is he is their guy for now and for quite some time after. So
and they have a competent backup in Wedgwood. So I mean, I don't think they have to play Blackwood the equivalent of 60 games. They can go say 50-30 and keep, and because that was the thing with New Jersey. I think they worked him too hard. But here's the thing. I saw Colorado play Toronto this week. It was a tight game, 1-1, and then a sort of a lucky break where the referee fell and the puck went to Steven Lorenz and he beat it wasn't on Blackwood. It was a great shot. They dominated that game. They dominated it from beginning to end, and the only reason that Toronto won, and we'll talk about Toronto in a minute, was Wall was phenomenal. So, but then they went next game to Ottawa and they kicked Ottawa's ass. They scored like 5 goals in the first period, and then they win in Montreal. So I'm not as worried about Colorado. It's just maybe a sort of a level of consistency, but I feel sorry for them because it's going to be Dallas, Colorado. That should be a conference final matchup because the NHL and their infinite wisdom and Gary Bettman, who's got his head up his ass, won't change the playoff.
Yeah, but ESPN will be all over that. They'll be like,
boy, that means
that's again, at the end of that, that's what this is.
People will be watching their Ross. There you go.
Yeah, it's the guarantee. We talked about this weeks before. It's the guarantee of a great matchup in the early rounds of the playoff to get everybody to get eyeballs on the playoffs. But the problem is, again, we anybody who really follows the sport. Like, to me, this is, we can always say about this playoff format that it's a casuals thing, that's the reason why they have it early to grab them in. And I get that's the way television's got to think about this. But at the end of the day, you want your best match. You want the best teams playing when the stakes are much higher than that.
But there is this weird mentality now, Ant, where I see like the narrative being, well, either one of these teams could win the Stanley Cup, but somebody's going to go home. And it's like, okay.
Well, the other thing, this is what they're also going to say as well. This is the other thing I was thinking of, is because this does beget arm races now at the trade deadline. Right. And I guarantee the NHL looks at this and says, those teams know they're going to play each other, so they know they've got to load up. So you're going to get those headline grabbing trades, all because both teams are arming themselves for first round Armageddon.
But the thing is, it's like, just like Russ, you were saying, these teams, one of them is going to go home. Yeah, in the second week of friggin' April. How about that's a matchup that belongs in the conference final at the end of May, going into the Stanley Cup final? I want to see Dallas and Colorado in the conference, and you can't do that because it's divisional format. They're either going to face each other in the first or second round. It's asinine, and but
ESPN doesn't want to.
And they'd rather, and at the end of the day, they want to guarantee. They want to guarantee
that
matchup.
First round sweeps. That's the problem.
Great, Russ. Then don't put it on ESPN 7 at 11 o'clock at night. I mean, they give the NHL short shrift right now, and they shouldn't, because I think they're losing Major League Baseball, or they're deciding to walk away from Major League Baseball. And at the end, I don't know if the NBA negotiated with them as well. The NHL might be the only thing other than football that they have at the end of the day. So, I mean, I'm sorry. It's short-sighted. It's stupid. Gary Bettman is a dinosaur for what he said at the GM meetings this week about the playoff format, about expanding the playoffs. But yeah, let's bring in an extra $4 billion for expansion for two teams that right now, and if we're going to talk about that, there's not enough players to play, and they're going to expand by.
There's always no. There's always players to play, Michael. Come on,
good players.
We're going to get to the players thing in a minute, and Mike, these things are all constants, just like fossil fuels.
Well, let's give this to our good friend NL King, who constantly messages us on Twitter about the Islanders.
Okay, but I want to talk about this because I have a different take on this one. Like, the Islanders, they got their point. Fine, whatever. I still don't think they're making the playoffs. The same, but I do think they'll have a better record than the Rangers, and I believe that, and I think it'll end up that way. But I do want to talk about Matt Coronado because he's a kid that I latched onto early on in my prospecting days, and really liked him, liked his speed, but he had to build up his body and kind of like just get his all-around game together. He's a New York kid. He's on the island, and he gets his 2 goals for Calgary. And Calgary is a team that just will not go away. I don't think they're making it, but they got to be
hang
really
around. They're going to hang around for
sure. They're going to hang around.
I'm rooting for them because Morgan Frost and Farrell.
Yeah, they're a fun team.
Yeah.
And Wolf, I think, has worked himself into a Calder nomination because
it's more than a nomination. He's one of the top 3, I think.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I don't think
he falls off the map. But
I think he's going to get nominated. I don't think he's going to win, but I think he's going to get nominated. But what I give them credit for, Calgary, is just their sort of stick-to-itiveness. They got their ass handed to them by Toronto. It was 6-1 or 6-2. And then they went after that, and they tightened it down and beat the Rangers 2-1 and dominated that game. And now they've gone on to win other games. I mean, I don't know if they're going to make it, but they're really trying, and they're really doing everything with not a ton of – I mean, they've got some young talent, but it's not fully realized.
Okay, so watered down talent in the NHL. Let's talk about it. I did a little research. Rachel Dory kind of brought it up on Twitter, and as one of her 12 points.
We're gonna have her on the show at some time in the near future.
Yeah, and she brought it, and she had it as one of her bunch of points following that meeting. But it was a really good point as far as that, because
if it's Rachel, I'm always expecting a dissertation from her.
Yeah,
so. And I mean that with the highest level of respect, of course.
But it's true. It's true. And so it made me look at the other leagues, or at least Major League Baseball, and see what's the difference between that and hockey, right? Mm-hmm. Oddly enough, their percentages of outside players, so from the hockey perspective, it would be outside of U.S. and Canada.
Right.
And from Major League Baseball would just be outside the U.S.
Right.
And both of them are right around 29% of players that are outside of that zone, mm-hmm. as far as where they could draw from. But the difference is for baseball is their countries that they're drawing from have a lot more people and a lot more people playing that sport than the hockey countries do, because they're smaller. Sweden smaller, Finland smaller.
Right.
All of these places are much smaller. So you look at that, and I think all of us were kind of in consensus, and we can go around the board here, that the 2 positions that seem to be affected the most are goaltending and defense. Yeah. I don't know. What do you guys think?
We know that they're always the most. They're the positions that require the longest to develop. At the end of the day, goaltending probably the longest. Defense a lot of times can take, some guys don't round into shape until they're 27, 28 years of age. And if we get guys kind of rushed into the league sooner because of that, that's not necessarily good for product. And that they're going to say, well, we got to think, you got to think about bigger picture, or then you go alternate routes and you try to find players that are in other leagues that might get a crack that, But again, the PA is always going to be on board with expansion. It's more jobs at the end of the day, and so they're going to be that's all they're going to look at is the opportunity for more jobs.
But they're gonna try to make a play in the new CBA, Anthony, for a chunk of the pie, and the owners will say go stuff it, because
it's never going to happen.
That's where they make their money. They're talking about a $2
That's classic. I mean, that's classic.
It is
business negotiation. It's not just the league thing. It's any business that aggressively expands.
They're talking about a $2 billion valuation in terms of expansion. So, which is hilarious, because it was $650 million for Seattle, and now it's going to close to $2 billion.
Well, because they're kind of basing it on the Celtics, and I don't think you could do that.
Well, they're counting on the Celtics basically being the water that lifts
right. But the problem is, it's all the brands in the world of sports.
Yeah,
I would think in my world, the Celtics are top 3 as far as being well known.
They're iconic. Yeah, them. The Cowboys,
Celtics, Yankees, Canadians, Cowboys. Yeah, those are the signature franchises.
It's been a while for the Cowboys, but I had
to
I had to take my shot as a Philadelphian. So.
No, that's bad.
But I'll say this: the biggest fan of expansion will be the Peter Mrazek's and the Jack Campbells of the world.
Oh
because,
yeah,
guarantee them a job until they're 40. Mm-hmm. But what's going to happen
until he's 45?
Yeah, what's going to happen here is I think you're going to see, and we know that there are countries that are sort of emerging markets, and you're starting to see more players. Germany, Switzerland, you'll get more from Czechia, more from Slovakia. But what's also going to happen is, knock on wood, if the war in Ukraine ends, you're probably going to see an influx of Russian players because there's not that many Russians in the NHL right now.
No, it's actually low compared to what it could be.
But the point here is you're sort of watering down the product for for money, and then for the owners, and that's their bag. They want to make as much money as possible, but the quality of the sport will go down. And if the intransigence of the commissioner of this league, if you're going to have 34 teams, and they're talking about staggering it, maybe not, have one expansion team and then have one expansion.
You're talking 36, Mike. You're only going 34.
Okay, so if it's 36, and you're going to have 16 playoff teams, Gary Bettman should be fired. That's
no, they're gonna have 18 playoff teams. You
right.
know that. They're gonna add as I think as Pierre
that's where the
has indicated that they're gonna add in like a playoff.
I think they'll do the play-in.
Then what they'll have to do, because you can't have a play-in in a divisional format, you're going to have a conference 1 through 8, and then have 8.
I think that's 9. When they'll change it so they can have the play.
I like the idea. There was one thing I did like from Sean Shapiro from DLLS Sports. He stated we're going to get the 36 teams. We may want to talk about a European style relegation zone. I love that idea.
No,
that was great. Yeah, you create like a 24 team NHL league, and then it'll be like.
So why don't they just have a playoff selection show and just
NHL championship round, and you have them basically have to play, however many 16 teams. So you're 24. That'd be 12. Maybe make it 20. I don't know. It would be pure chaos. But there's a part of me that's here for it, that finally have a North American league that actually major league that actually has a relegation and delegation increasing zone. That'll be interesting.
So, Mike, you did make a mention to Joseph Woll, and yes, that other game was a game that he was terrific in, and then there was the Nashville game. So, which Joseph Woll will we see in the playoffs?
Well, I mean, ironically, I don't think Joseph Woll was bad in the Nashville game. If you look at Ed Russ, I watched.
You have to be bad if you give up 4 or 5 goals against Nashville.
No, you don't. No, you don't.
Yes, you do. Yes.
No, you don't.
You are.
Russ, will you let me talk, please?
Sure. Go ahead.
No, you don't. Because I think the first 2 goals were absolutely perfect shots. Perfect. The third one was a shovel in goal. Where he made the initial save and it was sort of pushed into the net. The fourth one was a terrible giveaway by Morgan Riley, who was at the end of his shift and passed it in front of the net, or it was a sort of a missed assignment between him, Brandon Carlo, and I think it was Luke Evangelista had a wide open chance in front of the net. I don't blame Joseph Woll for the loss. What I do blame, and that's the reason I put if you're looking for positivity, it's not here, is the fact that the Toronto Maple Leafs continually have their head up their ass. Is like you had an opportunity yesterday with Florida losing, with Tampa Bay losing, both in regulation, to move ahead in the Atlantic Division, and you're playing one of the worst teams in the NHL who could not put a good effort together on most nights. Talking to Emma Lingen, who's my co-host on one of the podcasts I do for the hockey news. They're completely an inconsistent team, not having been able to put it together. They're not listening to Andrew Brunette. The Leafs are up 2-0 at the end of the first period. Matthew Nice takes a penalty at the end of the first. I don't know what for. I didn't see the. And of course, Nashville scores a power play goal, and they got the momentum. And oh, by the way, the Leafs were up 3-0 by Scott Laughton deflection goal. And they said it was they ruled it a goal, but then they went to Toronto and said that it was deflected with a high stick. Scott Laughton, Anthony, 8 games, 0 points.
Yeah.
-5. And he's gone from third line center to fourth line center to fourth line wing. As I said, he was not worth a first round pick. I didn't think he was going to be as bad as he is right now. I don't know what the hell's going on, but the way he's playing right now, he might not be in the playoff roster.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely. I was hoping to see a bit more impact from Laughton in that role, but yeah, it's strange. Sometimes when you're trying to graft yourself onto a new team after you've been with one organization your entire career, there's sometimes things kind of take maybe a little bit more time to adapt. Again, this was at the end of the day, Philadelphia. Laughton has always been, and we all know this, is he's a forward to me, as in like he can play center. Right. But sort of his calling card also is his versatility to play, multiple positions. Mm-hmm. So it feels like for him right now, it's a case of just kind of you go, and also from being a player who is so integral to the Flyers to now sort of, kind of being a guy who being one of the guys now in the room,
dropped in,
and trying to find sort of what my role is here in a room that's completely different dynamically than the Flyers locker room was. And I do wonder whether, there's a little bit of like, I don't think he wanted to move out of Philadelphia, but sort of understood that's the nature of the business. It's just, but he's absolutely, it has not been a good start for Laughton. And I kind of feel though, like he might need a little bit of time trying to figure out his role, but again, when you're in the heat of a race and you've given up the assets that Toronto has, which is you gave up a first round pick, granted it's protected, but still, it's a first-round pick, and you see Nikita Grabenkin having a really good start in Lehigh Valley, and he's going to figure in.
Sure,
I'm sure Flyer fans are sort of chuffing that, have their chest puffed out, going, "See, Danny pulled the wool over Treliving's eyes and making this."
I'll tell you what it reminds me of.
I'm not there with saying it's that, but
not yet,
what they want
to end up that way. I think it's like, I'll just say this, Mike, and then you can go on. I think it's like when the Islanders got Ryan Smith. That's what it's reminding me of.
Yeah, but Ryan Smith was a higher level player. I mean,
but he didn't do well for them.
No, but he was
a long time.
But he was at the end of it, Russ. He was, I think, 33, 34 years old. I mean, that was the perception I got, or I'm pretty sure I remember that he was like at the end of his career, and they were expecting. But Laughton is 27, 28 years old. That's not the problem. The problem is Laughton is a bottom six forward. He's at best a third line center. And I said, after watching him for a long time, said, I think he's more fourth line. And now he's already been moved because they're playing Max Domi up the middle, which I think is a disaster because he's terrible defensively. And they're playing David Kampf, who they sat out for a couple weeks because he made a couple stupid plays. They're playing them ahead of the guy that they traded a first round pick for. I look at it, it's like they gave up the first round pick because they got retained salary on the deal, and they didn't have to give up one of their big prospects in either Minton or Cowan or Danford, and they wanted to make two trades, and they made the second one with Carlo, and I don't think anybody is complaining about that because I think Carlo and along with Riley is an effective.
Yeah, the Toronto's blue line in my mind is now a complete, in terms of what you've always. It's basically now what you always wanted, Mike.
Right, but
for all intents and purposes, in terms of from a personnel standpoint.
But the funny thing is that they finally got the defense where they needed to support Morgan Riley, and Morgan Riley's having his worst season of the year. But I still think, like, when it comes to the playoffs, he'll turn it on, and I think he's an effective player. Mm-hmm. But my issue here is, again, the lack of killer instinct in the part of the Toronto Maple Leafs, where it comes, they're up 2-0 on a bad team. They sulk after they get the third goal taken away, and they allow one of the worst teams in the league this year to come back. And please, you don't think like Stamkos, Michael Bunting had had hot dog, had mustard and ketchup on his hot dog celebration after he scored the goal. I mean, they were that was their Stanley Cup, and it's the Leafs have to rise to the occasion every game because every team takes pleasure in beating them. And I'm sorry. They are not going anywhere unless they finish in first place in the Atlantic. And last night was
you do get to the point now where after these moves are made that it's legitimate to ask about the mindset of the core group.
Yeah.
And why we got to the point of what, let's say that trade went through. Say Marner said, yeah, I'm good. I'm out on Carolina. Sounds like a good spot. And you get Mikko Rantanen in trade. Does that dynamically change the room in Toronto? I don't know. We're never going to find out, obviously, but it's one of those things where you almost feel like, did that sort of situation getting floated out there, could it have affected the room going, oh my God, they tried to deal Marner in this circumstance? You understood again for the player who they were talking about.
I'm going to give you a headline. Here's a headline.
Mm-hmm.
From a day ago, Toronto Sun. Maple Leafs can pounce on disappointing Predators. Well, they didn't.
Right. And they didn't.
And that is a worry. That's a worry.
There is no killer instinct. There is no, I don't think there ever has been. And I don't know how it affected the room, Anthony, but it's just
a theory. I'm wondering if once that happens.
I mean, it's possible.
I'll extrapolate from that. Mm-hmm. Maybe it doesn't have any effect, but it does have an effect on the point of view of the organization, who has tried to negotiate with Darren Ferris all year, and Darren Ferris has said, no, we're going to wait till the end of the season. And them floating out a Marner Rantanen deal tells me they're fed up. Now, they've clearly said they want Marner, but if he says, I want $1 more than Austin Matthews, I think they're going to tell him to go fly a kite. It's like, it's like, okay, you want to stay in Toronto. I love Toronto. It's where I am. Okay, well, not saying take less. You could be the highest paid winger in the league. You're not going to make as much. This is the same situation with Rantanen. The only thing that was prevented here was Marner had a full no move and Rantanen had a partial no trade. And Rantanen got traded and Marner didn't. And Marner, if he had a partial no trade, Mitch Marner would not be on the Toronto Maple Leafs right now. I am convinced of that.
That's fair. I mean, that's why he has it.
That's why that's the protection exactly for this exact scenario. But now, as Mike said, you wanted to stay. Cool. You better start. You need to start balling out here.
Yeah, no question. I do want to tell people we're not going to get into the NCAAs or anything, or it's too early in it. There are some guys playing great. Philly, Alex Bump looked great yesterday. We'll get to it, but it's not going to
be. No question. I mean, Bumps, and we'll get.
He's not a superstar like his coach said.
His coach, I think. Listen, we'll say what it is. The coach is obviously very excited, and he's having a great season.
He's having a great year, yeah.
And and it gives It certainly will give Flyer fans some excitement, because I do think he's gonna be. There's a decent chance next year. I think it's coming in, especially with college hockey experience in this case, that if he has a strong camp, he could very well. He could break with the Flyers in the fall.
Because he's 22, going to be 23. It's possible.
Exactly, and again, especially if they go this offseason, they have to make a deal if they're looking to make a deal for a center, and they think Bump can be the replacement forward for whoever it is that they deal. Then that's something obviously to consider. But let's continue.
Yeah, but the Flyers. They did play a good game against Dallas. They didn't play a good game before that. I see something interesting happened yesterday. I actually watched the Torts press conference after, and he said he went into the room and he told the guys a good message, but I can't tell you what it is. And it's like, you know what? Here's the funny thing. John is acting like what he says in the locker room is a state secret. And I can tell you that 3/4 of the fan base is over it. They're so tired of it. They would like to hear something out of him to say, how did you congratulate the guys for playing a good game, even though you lost? Because they did play a good game, and fans are tiring of that, Ann.
I mean, it's just at this point now, I feel like also the Tortorella run at this point now it's becoming very obvious that it's run its course.
Yeah.
I would be genuinely surprised if he is their head coach going into next season, because again, the team is just not, if he's looking to be coaching a team that's it has a chance for contention, it's going to be at least, and that's the sobering reality, I think, for Flyer fans. They kind of know it, they'll die in the wool ones, but if you're a casual kind of dropping in, that's going, oh, Mitchkov, there's a lot more work. There's a lot more groundwork that has to be done here. And I know what Mike's going to say is like, well, then why was Tortorella the coach in the first place at this point now? And then the answer is,
sounded like Mike.
Yeah. And the answer is, in this case, I feel like that Torts was here basically to instill strong habits, I guess you could say, for young forwards, like to be defensively responsible and just, and I think there's enough people out there, especially, the veterans who have been on this team who are like, yeah, the things that he does are good, but are the buttons, when we get to the point of, you can't just sort of be the team that's always punching up. You got to develop talent. And there's some players that I felt like that did not necessarily happen under Torts. And that's the point, Anthony. It's like, if he is there to develop talent, then they need to play. Well, they also look at it, I think, as well as like a call. They also deter, it's one of those things where he's sort of the drill sergeant culling through who they think is part of this core for the future and who is not, and to see how they respond and to see how certain players respond under pressure. And the methods of that, it goes back to what Torts says in this case, where it's just, but going back to what Russ just said, I'm not going to tell, I said something, but I'm not going to tell you what it is.
I mean,
like, okay, so then that's wonderful. The end result is still the end result.
This is the most ass backwards rebuild I've ever seen, because part of a rebuild is you have to be bad enough to get good draft picks. They lucked out with Mishkov because Mishkov slipped in the first round of their pick. I think it was 7th overall.
It was 7th, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They're not going to get a top 10 pick unless they win the lottery this year. They're not going
to they're right now slotted at, it would be around 5 right now. Now most, if you mess around sort of a tankathon and everything, the percentages seem to be, when I messed around with it, was that the percentage seemed like it was more likely Philly would get number 6 than number 5.
Right.
And not moving up from that. Being said, it's, you would like, a higher percentage of being at the upper end of a draft that, again, when you're outside, as Russ will say, outside of the top
11,
you're going to get a pretty good player in this draft.
I mean, for the top pick, the top 11 have a chance at the top pick, but outside of the top 5 or 6 is where you're really not going to get.
My feeling on this draft is that Philly's going to probably with what is it, 7 picks now in the first 2 rounds.
Yeah.
One of those first round, I think my gut feeling is whichever is the middle pick is the one that probably would be dangled as part of a deal to try to get a top 6 center, along with 1 or 2 of those second round picks and also other players. That to me seems to be the playbook. They're not going to, I do not under any circumstance believe that they're going to give up the lottery pick. Especially in this draft.
No, they're not going to do that, because
when the talent drops off as much as it does past the top.
After everything that they did to build up for this draft, they have to walk away with something pretty good from this draft, no matter what.
Exactly.
So they're not going to do that. I agree. It'll be interesting to see. I think the strategy for them is going to be get as high as you can in this draft for that first pick. Whether that's
right, if they look at it 1 or 2, that's wonderful. You get, if you can end up with one of Schaefer or Hagens, who I think you and I are in agreement, and that's our agreement that those are the top 2 picks in the draft. And then after that,
Misa, I wouldn't argue any.
Yeah, Misa's also another one. But again, if you're trying to get a dyed in the wool sort of, it depends on how you see Hagens versus Misa in this case.
This is the bigger thing. Like on Laughton, I brought this up, and some fans have said this, and I do believe this. This isn't the draft to play it safe when you have all these picks. The Flyers have played it safe for too long. Mitchkov was not a home run swing. Mitchkov was a guarantee. It's just the other teams didn't want him because they didn't want to wait. That's why they were worried about the weight, not the talent. Right. Now, this time, you have to take some home run swings for talent, because otherwise you just end up with bottom 6 guys.
Yeah, you could be taking the swing, and again, if you're in the top 10
swings in this draft
for a Mishkov, because again, the Luchenko pick to me was they saw an organizational need and assets, his overall speed. That being said, I'm not going to overhype Jet Luchenko in terms of what he can be. I am not about to turn around to you and say that I believe he is a 60 to 70 point scorer in the National Hockey League. I am just not comfortable with saying that or projecting that. I think it's far more likely in this circumstance, that he's a good middle sixer, and that we go from there. So yeah, you could say Luchenko was kind of a safe pick in terms of that, but I do think there's aspects of his talent that are particularly
like. Here's another strategy too.
But you're right about in terms of the talent. If you think a guy has an upper end, like a higher ceiling guy, you have to in this draft you have to grab the higher ceiling guy.
Where the Flyers are right now, and I recognize it completely because it happened in Toronto back in say 08 and 09, is the failure to sort of buy into what they needed to be, which is a rebuilding team. And if you say that doesn't have any effect, the Leafs in 08 drafted Luke Shen. They had to trade up to fifth overall to draft Luke Shen. They were 7th. Their pick would have been Josh Bailey. And they miss out because they didn't tank. They miss out on Stamkos, on Doughty, on Pietrangelo. And then the following year, they still do it. They still play it sort of halfway up the middle. End up with the 7th pick overall. They miss out on Tavares. They miss out on Hedman. And they draft Nazem Kadri 7th overall. Now, NHL players, don't get me wrong, but they're not superstars. And that is what the Flyers and Danny Briere needed to do, was not tank, but you make your team, you find out what your young players are. They're going to make mistakes.
They're going to say they were doing that. They're going to say to you that they were doing that. They're going to say that they were doing that.
Yeah.
The young players were given opportunities.
Right.
You can't say they weren't, Mike.
Or shit.
Right, but it's skirting.
It's not. It is what it is. The young players were, there were guys that they were given opportunities.
They've got limited windows, some of them.
Right. The problem is that the opportunity was the problem was that they weren't given as much grace to make mistakes and play through them as much. Right. That's a different story.
Right. The last thing I would say about this draft strategy, and then we'll go with one more point. So if I'm the Flyers, I am of the belief you can never have enough goaltending. And you could see how the Flyers goaltending is to say that, yes, that is true. And so Joshua Ravensburgen's going to be a first-round goalie in this draft. He is. If you're the Flyers, even if it's with your 2nd pick, if he's still on the board, then take him. Because it can't hurt you to do that. Because for all the goalies you have, there's never a guarantee that you found a guy.
There isn't. Yeah, and I'm looking at the system right.
And that's the way to get it.
I think the system depth is good. I think the system depth is good. It's possible, again, that one of those goalies could be potentially used as a trade chip. If you're talking like a player who might be, again, if you're used, let's say, again, my theory on this draft has been lottery pick use, the higher of the 2 middle picks is in a trade, and then your back end of the 1st round pick, which would be probably the Colorado pick in this circumstance, right? If Ravensburg is there at that pick, wherever that may lie, sure, take a shot at him there. I'm okay. That would be, I'm sure.
I still would take him with the middle pick. Like
if the middle pick is there, whichever of those 2 picks that they end up using. But again, that's at the end of the day, if you're going to try to entice a team to potentially move off of a top 6 center, that's going to be the more likely of the 2 picks to get moved. So whichever of those picks is there, whichever one they deal off, if they want to use the other one for, Ravensburg in this case, I'm not against that idea. And I'm sure somebody, well, you need 4, you need more. I'm like, you need just talent, period. You need chips that you think can develop. I mean, yes, you have Bjarnason. He's going to be playing in the AHL next year. You got Javragan in the pipe. Sure. You're hoping you get him over. But yeah, I don't think there's any case where you ever want to have a short.
There's another 6'5" potential goalie stud.
Right. And let's say, again, if he somehow ends up going into this early high, whatever your high 2nd round pick might be, if it's not another
just
thing.
Look at what Jake Ottinger did for Dallas. They took him at the end.
You take as many when it comes to goaltenders. It takes a while to develop. You want to have that sort of. And use the phrase conveyor belt, but you need that. I mean, you don't know where things are with Kolosov. I think he's very raw. And needs more and absolutely should play more in the AHL.
And he is right now, so that's fine.
And he is, and that's what they need to do in order for him to refine his skill set. So if you add another goalie and it's higher in this draft than fans may or may not like, so why another goalie with your first round pick? I said, we're telling you why. It's possible that if you are trying to make a trade and an upgrade, you need someone to be able to. You need a talented goaltender to replace that player if the other goaltender is moved.
Right.
You hope it's not Javragan, because I am absolutely of the opinion
we all like him, but we don't.
I think he's up, but we don't know what nobody ever knows what he's going to be until he gets over here.
Right. So, Mike, there's some teams that have some unfortunate records in sports. The Sacramento Kings, the LA Clippers, the New York Jets, and the Buffalo Sabres. And the Sabres are moving up the list same time as the Jets. But now they're 14 years without the playoffs. Next year would be 15. I think the Clippers were 15. I think Sacramento was 16. Like, this is getting into that area where fans look at it like it has to end. Like, they can't deal with it anymore.
Well, I mean, it's not even a Buffalo record, because the Bills, and it's tough to realize this because the Bills have been successful and made the playoffs every year since 2018. I believe it's every year. They went without the playoffs from 2000 to 2017. And so
those are great years for me.
Oh, of course they were. But the dysfunction and the embarrassment of this organization right now it's undeniable, and it's to the point where I think fans are starting to say, call me when you're ready to win. And that's the problem here, because now this week you found a new level of embarrassment, because this is a year where Alex Nedeljkovic scores an empty net goal. The goalie scores an empty net goal. The game that they played against Colorado, where they were up 4-0 in the first period and chased Georgiev, and I think Wedgwood came in, and they were up 4-1 in the third period, and Colorado rallies to win in regulation in the 5-4, I believe. And that was the game that spurred the 13-game winless skid, which destroyed their season. They were competitive for a playoff spot until that point, and then they went 0-10-3 in that 13-game winless skid. So they have no chance at the playoffs. In December, they were done. You've traded another core piece in Dylan Cousins, and the guy that they traded for, Josh Norris, has not played in, I think, 10 days. We don't know exactly what the injury is. And then on Thursday, playing against Utah, down 3-2 in the third period, they don't recognize that they have a delayed penalty, and Tage Thompson bank shots it off the boards, missing the point guy and putting it in his own net. I mean, this is a team right now that there are players that are restricted free agents who I think are dying to get out of here. And this is a problem, because this is an organization that has teams that players with no trade clauses or partial no trade clauses. Now Buffalo is on that list with, like, say, Winnipeg and Calgary. They're places they don't want to go to, so they can't they can't sway these guys, and they can't get free agents unless they overpay them, like they did Jason Zucker last summer. This is a good franchise with a good fan base, but the organization has their head up their rectum. And then you have Terry Pegula making the trip in Utah, Minnesota, and Winnipeg. That's not exactly going down to Florida and enjoying the sun. I think he's evaluating what's going on with Kevin Adams.
No, he is.
But Mike, you know what? I don't believe, Russ, that they're going to fire him until I see them fire him.
I know.
I don't believe it.
I will say this. Winnipeg and Kevin Cheverdayoff in particular did do a good job of going to get players with term. Besides doing a good job of drafting and developing,
yes,
they did all of that. And now what you see, is a very competitive team the last couple of years. There's no reason the Sabres can't do it, but they haven't had the same skill in the front office. Let's face it.
They haven't. I mean, that LA trade with Winnipeg, the Dubois deal, where they got Iafallo and they get Velarde, and they brought in 3 players who were under control, and that's what the Sabres have to do. And I think that's what they looked at with Norris. That Norris had 5 years left in his contract, just like Cousins did. But you had to ignore that. You don't know how many games you're going to get out of Norris because he constantly gets hurt. Right. The problem here is offer sheets with Levi, maybe Peterka, who's having a really good year. Players on the final year of their contract going into the summer, like Alex Tuck. These are players that if they can't get them signed, or if they're asking for too much money, then this organization, I don't know whether they have the stomach to pay them what those players are asking, but they have to,
you have to pay somebody.
Right. And the problem here is
paying people now.
The problem here is that this team has a core with very good talent, Byram, Power, Dahlin on defense, the forwards that we just mentioned. But
do you want to give out that trade rumor that you've been hearing?
Well, I don't know if there's anything to it, but there was a lot of talk about Peterka and the Rangers before the deadline. Frank Cervalli reported that. He didn't think there was anything to it in terms of it was like a 10% thing. But the rumor out there, which makes sense if you're looking to sort of shake up the core, but also bring talent back, was Keandre Miller and Alex and Lafreniere going to Buffalo for Peterka and Owen Power. And Owen Power is somebody, he's under a long-term contract like Lafreniere is, former first overall picks. I think the Sabres want to re-sign and extend Byram. If they clear Power's $7 million contract, that would allow them to do that. But again, you have to find out whether he actually wants to stay. If he wants to play out the deal and play and sign a 2-year deal and then walk in free agency, then it's
going to be tough if he thinks he's got a chance to go to the Rangers. That is there's a certain.
But also, Miller has to get paid. He's a year from getting paid. Yeah. So you have to make sure Miller would take a contract with you before you do it. But
this feels like a deal that was discussed and will be expanded upon close to the draft and a little after the draft potentially.
Yeah, but it
could be picks. It could be picks involved going either way.
But it does make sense in the sense that they're getting number 1 overall pick for number 1 overall pick. Maybe change of scenery. We know that the Rangers need help on the left side of the D because and I think Power.
On D, period.
Yeah, and I think Power, Power and Fox on the top pairing, okay. Carson Soucy and Fox on the top pairing, nah, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's it. That's it for Off the Post. We'll catch everybody next time.
Take care, everybody.
Mike says goodbye.